fairly obvious, but the leadership has to come from you, Bill, and to bring a team from 4th place during the regular season to the world's title, the 11th title in 13 years, you've got the respect of everybody in the country.
Well, Jack, it's my guys. It's just my guys. These guys.
One look at the numbers gives Bill Russell a foolproof argument for being the greatest basketball player of all time. While Russell is a 5-time NBA MVP and 12-time All-Star with 21,620 career rebounds, the individual stats, however, aren't what define Russell's greatness. It's the 11 NBA championships that he brought to the Boston Celtics. Russell's mettle and dedication helped form one of the greatest and most dominant franchises in all of sports. Russell revolutionized the game of basketball, setting the foundation for the NBA today. Yet he's often left out of conversations debating who's the greatest. At the end of his Celtics career in 1969, he went to coach the Seattle Sonics, the farthest team from Boston. So why did such a remarkable player seem so distant from the team he built to greatness? It all has to do with the racism and injustice that plagued Russell throughout his career and his life. Russell did not get the glory and respect in the prime of his career, but if we look deeper into his untold story, it is clear that how he dealt with his struggles only strengthened his legacy. Not only did Russell set the standard for professional basketball, but for what it takes to stay loyal to your values and rights no matter the circumstances, which has inspired generations after him to do the same. William Fenton Russell was born in West Monroe, Louisiana on February 12, 1934. Innocence was sadly left out of his childhood as it was riddled with the racism and poverty that was common in the Deep South. Racist groups like the Ku Klux Klan resurfaced in the 1910s and 20s as a new form of nativism. They wreaked havoc in the Bible Belt of the South, where they put on fear-mongering parades called conclaves and were violent to blacks using the bloody lash and tar and feathers. The Klan's presence sharply declined by 1930 when leaders were revealed to be using it as a money scheme, and Americans finally seemed to grasp its cruelty. A new absence of the KKK did not represent easy life for black Americans. The segregation and anti-black biases were a constant presence in the South. Jim Crow laws were in effect after Reconstruction and kept African Americans from equal education and facilities, despite Plessy v. Ferguson's ruling that separate can be equal. Racist aggressions were frequent at that time, and Russell was a witness to it all. The economic hardships that Russell was born into were commonplace in the United States in the 1930s. The Great Depression began after overproduction and deflation in the economy built up to the eventual catalyst of the stock market crash of 1929. Americans faced business failures, unemployment, and debilitating poverty from 1929 to 1939. Franklin Delano Roosevelt created the New Deal to offer relief, recovery, and reform to alleviate the struggles of the Depression. They didn't, however, offer equal aid to African Americans who dealt with the same struggles, only magnified. The Russells, as a result of this, were grossly impoverished. In the 1940s, the United States' economic troubles declined alongside its entrance into World War II. Factory work to supply the effort increased, opening more work opportunities for blacks in industrial cities. To escape poverty and discrimination, the Russell family moved across the country from Louisiana to Oakland, California, when Bill was only 10 years old. The Russells were just one family out of the nearly 5 million African Americans who took part in the Second Great Migration to escape discrepancies in benefits, labor, and education. The families that migrated left the South to the more industrialized North, and unlike the First Great Migration, they also went west. Racial treatment did improve, but the Russells still lived in public housing projects due to poverty.
And he started to work in the foundry for $42 a week, which was about half what he had been making before in his business. And he sacrificed so he could be home every night to be a good parent.
Bill Russell went on to play basketball at the University of San Francisco with the hopes of escaping poverty and making his father proud. His talents were apparent from the start as he brought the team 2 NCAA titles and at the same time won a gold medal at the Olympics. The professional future seemed bright for Russell if he kept going.
Very few people knew that Pee Wee Reese and Jackie Robinson were going to be great teammates. They would become the boys of summer. Jackie Robinson, though not embraced by all of his teammates, did indeed win them over one by one.
The color barrier in national sports had been broken by Jackie Robinson in 1947 as a first baseman on the Brooklyn Dodgers. Chuck Cooper then broke the color barrier in the NBA after being drafted by the Celtics.
Brown in 1950, and Walter Brown said, "I'll take Charles Cooper out of Duquesne University." And one of the other owners said, "You can't take him his color." And Mr. Brown said, "I don't give a damn if he's striped, polka dot, or plaid. Boston takes Charles Cooper out of Duquesne University because he's the best player available to help our franchise.
Russell wasn't the first black NBA player when he was drafted by the St. Louis Hawks in 1956. With a dexterous trade by Red Auerbach, Russell was a Celtic. He would later break a different barrier, the first black superstar in the NBA and in the world. Russell wasted no time in his entrance to the NBA. His first season was the Celtics' first championship. So how did one person have such an immediate and substantial impact? Russell played basketball like no one ever before. His unusual style of defense left the other team lost. His focus on defensive strategy was a shock in of itself. It was typically the second priority. Russell took the then horizontal game and went vertical. He jumped to perfectly timed shot blocking and used it as an offensive gain, something that was never done before. He was a natural-born leader with a high basketball IQ and tough mentality. With the help over the years of legendary teammates like Bob Cousy, John Havlicek, and Richard Sherman, the Celtics won 9 championships in Russell's first 10 seasons. When Red Auerbach retired, he handed his title as head coach to Russell, confident with his impressive basketball knowledge and strategy. Russell was the first African-American professional sports coach, all while he was still a top player in the league. In his 3-year reign as player coach, the Celtics won 2 championships. Despite the absolute dominance from the Celtics, game attendance was lackluster, especially relative to the hugely popular Boston Bruins, a mainly white team. The average attendance for the Celtics' 1959 to 1969 season was 7,224, while the Bruins was 12,159 in the same years. Discrepancies are not unwarranted, but it is questionable considering the Celtics won 9 championships those years and the Bruins didn't get one. The greatness of the Celtics didn't matter to Boston fans who let racial biases charge them. Players were aware of these discrepancies as well, and it had an impact on the player-fan relationship.
Means that there was really no connection for me between the fans in Boston and the Boston Celtics. I remember when Kuz retired, a guy walks up to me, I was in Boston, he guy says, "What are you guys gonna do now? You don't have Kuz to carry you." So I said, "Well, it'll be difficult, we gotta make an adjustment. But do yourself a favor and find out who the MVP in this league was the last 3 years."
Russell won the Sports Illustrated Man of the Year title in 1968 for his admirable actions on and off the court. In that addition, teammate John Havlicek recounted some of Russell's wisdom he learned at a dinner party that year. Russell stated, "Much of defending is instinctive. He's going to shoot, so obviously I must do this. But it's also possible to analyze your reactions in certain situations so you can learn to control what you do, so that it's not an accident anymore." Russell's description of his defensive strategies here put his natural basketball abilities on full display. Russell's defensive might was a result of both instinct and prior preparation and knowledge, which is just as important to him. This was not only visible in Russell's basketball skills, but in his everyday life. Russell was the first black superstar in the NBA. He was an extremely successful black man in a time filled with deep-rooted racial prejudice and tensions, thus his actions were often highly scrutinized by fans. With all this controversy, Russell knew he was the only one who could control his reactions. That ability was the main factor in his prominent actions took to achieve civil justice. Instead of lashing out after unfair and cruel treatment, Russell took action deliberately to help himself and other persecuted African Americans. For example, in 1962, the Celtics had a game scheduled in Lexington, Kentucky, when the black players on the Celtics were denied entry into a restaurant. Under Russell's leadership, the black players boycotted the game. Russell wanted the country to know that African Americans can and will stand up for themselves to earn their deserved respect.
A restaurant down the street, and the proprietor asked me what I wanted. I said, "This is a restaurant, isn't it? I'd like to get something to eat."
Russell was outspoken and unapologetic in everything he did, never straying away from his values. This mindset was vital to his status as a civil rights activist, as well as a good man with integrity and strength. Russell continued that display of analyzed reactions by participating in the iconic March on Washington in 1963. Alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Russell walked in hopes of making a change. He was even offered a seat on stage during King's powerful "I Have a Dream" speech, but he declined, wanting to avoid taking credit for work that he didn't have full responsibility in. After the peaceful protests of the civil rights movement winded down, Russell took a strong part in the Black Power movement, most predominantly by supporting Muhammad Ali in his controversial decision to stay out of the Civil War because of American racism.
We came out of friendship to Muhammad Ali.
Russell would later be called Felton X, like Malcolm X, to mock his activism. No matter the backlash, Russell stayed true to his beliefs, so much so that he missed his Hall of Fame induction in 1975, possibly because he was the first black player to be inducted at that point. He also opted for a private number retirement in 1972 because of the lack of appreciation he received from the franchise. With time, however, Russell has seemed to be making amends with the city that so often let him down. A second and more sentimental number retirement ceremony was held for Russell in 1999. 77 years after his retirement, a statue of the great finally stood strong in Boston's City Hall Plaza. The NBA Finals MVP was named after him, but there is still a lot of making up to do. Russell continues his activism today, supporting the Black Lives Matter movement to fight against police brutality. He showed support to Colin Kaepernick, who controversially knelt during the national anthem to protest inequalities. In 2010, Russell was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his civil justice activism. Russell's past actions were necessary for athletes like Kaepernick today to feel comfortable in activism. This past year, LeBron James was patronized by the media, being told to shut up and dribble and stay out of social issues and politics. Russell experienced decades of injustices and had the strength to fight against them. To unsure athletes or people in general who are in fear of standing up for themselves and taking control of their reactions, Russell proves to be an example every day, and as time goes on, he will hopefully get all the respect and honor that he deserves.